Hi, y'all. Welcome to Business Book Club. Josh had to reboot his computer, some technical issues. So he should be on in just a hot second, but I just wanted to pop on now. Oh, I see his face. I'm going to add him to the stream. Oh, we're here. Look at
Hi,
that. Hi, Josh.
hi, Leslie.
Amazing. We're live.
Wow. Whoever
It's
thought?
I
Whoever
know.
thought you and I would both be live?
Together. Dun, dun,
Crazy.
dun.
Crazy.
Well, to everybody joining us, I know folks are still coming online, but big thank you to taking time out of your day for this business book club for Snap Selling. Very excited to dig into this book. It is full of gems. Very excited to welcome my guest for the night, Josh Braun, the one and only. Quickly before we jump in, drop a comment and tell us where you're at in the book. Have you not read it and you're just joining for our smiley faces? Did you maybe order it, started it, haven't quite finished it, or have you read the book at some point in your career? So drop a comment, let us know where you are at in the book, and also drop any questions that you have. Josh and I are happy to sort of ad lib and try to answer your questions throughout the night. So make sure to get those in the chat. For anybody that doesn't know me, maybe you just came for Josh. I'm Leslie Vanetz, the founder of Sales Team Builder and the host of this business book club. And I'm joined by my longtime friend and mentor, Josh Braun. Josh, what should people know about you?
Thanks for inviting me. And for any of you that don't know me and are just here for Leslie, I am Josh, and I also help salespeople get a little bit better. So that is what I do. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and also follow Leslie religiously on TikTok.
The TikTok. I'll never forget when, after like months and months of me like borderline bullying you to get on TikTok, I'm out working at a cafe and you call me and you're like, yeah, hey, so I decided to do it. I got on TikTok. I started posting last week and I was like, Josh, that's amazing. Like, how's it going? Don't get discouraged if it takes a little while. And you were like, I already have 12,000 followers. I was like, I'm hanging up on you. Like, I'm hanging up the phone on you right now.
I think you did. And thank you so much for turning me on to it, because it was not really something that I wanted to do, but I took your advice and I've been enjoying it. Have kind of a love-hate relationship with it, but I'm sort of getting at peace with it a little bit. So thank you for that.
Love-hate relationship. I hear you. I hear you. And we have some folks joining us and letting us know where they are at in the book. And it looks like most people have read it. I guess that's the privilege of reading like an absolute classic, that most people at some point have read it. Embarrassingly, I had not read it before. This was my first time.
Did you read Selling to Big Companies?
No.
Her first?
Okay. I guess I've just been sleeping on Jill, but is it true? Because I like get her newsletter and I follow her religiously on LinkedIn, but I don't know. I think primarily it's because I consumed most of my sales stuff either through like blog posts or podcasts or LinkedIn until about 2.5, 3 years ago. And then I switched almost entirely to books. So the great thing is that I have a huge backlog of amazing books to read. The bad thing is that some of these classics I'm just consuming for the first time.
Yeah, I started off in selling, 15 or 20 years ago, and went through a bunch of sales books, the ones that you're probably aware of, and none of them really resonated with me. They just never felt good on my soul. And fortunately, one day in Google, I typed in, how do I sell to big companies? Because I was selling to enterprise. And I just happened to type that in to Google, and a book came up saying how to sell to big companies. Like, that's the title. That's literally the title of the book.
You're like SEO before it was even a thing.
Right. I think so. So I went and I bought it, and I still have it, and it's dog-eared. And I must have read it, 100 times. And so much of the success that I had as a salesperson was due to that book. So much so that I felt so inspired to reach out to Jill, not thinking that she would ever in 1,000 years get back to me, not to ask for anything, but just to say how much she's helped me. Not only sell more, but actually do it in a way that felt good on my soul, where I didn't feel like salesy and manipulative and gross. And I don't know, I think in about a couple hours, she like responded back, and we had a really nice dialogue and actually got on the phone had a really nice conversation. So I adore her as a sales professional, but also as a person, to even take the time to speak to me when I was in my, I think, early 30s, way long ago.
Those are formidable. There's a handful of folks when I was like I mean, nobody's a nobody, but you know what I mean? When I was like a nobody, that I would pose a question to or reach out to, and I thought, no way they're going to respond to me, and took the time to write back like super thoughtful notes, to pick up the phone and call me. And now those are people for the rest of my career that I will always like double down to help. So you're not the only person that shared a story with me about Jill that's like that. I think she is who she seems to be in the book. She walks it like she talks it, as the Migos say. So one thing that surprised me when I read this book, like I knew it had been out for a while, but I did not believe that it had been published 12 years ago. And I only gathered that it was maybe a bit old after the various BlackBerry references. Did you ever know BlackBerry?
Yeah, I did, Leslie. And I've owned 8 tracks. And so we can go back if you want to really like go there. Yes.
It's okay. I owned a BlackBerry. It was my favorite phone. It was a BlackBerry Pearl. Like, I think I still have a bit of like a soft spot in my heart for it. But I was like, Blackberries, how long ago was this book published? 12 years ago. And I think what's so impressive about it being 12 years old is how extraordinarily relevant it is today. I still think as a profession, many of us are struggling to leave behind some of those old school sales techniques, to like use your language, some of them that kind of hurt our soul, make us feel slimy, and replace those with meaningful ways to connect with our buyers. And I mean, Jill just like absolutely nailed that. So maybe I'm going to start by just making sure that everybody's on the same page. This is what SNAP stands for: simple, invaluable, a little bit of a stretch there, aligned, and priority. And then I have like no fewer than 25 questions to throw your way. So we're going to go big screen. Jill kicks off the book, Josh, by talking about frazzled customer syndrome. So I just want to start there. Like, customers are more frazzled than ever now. Our inboxes are fuller. Most people are wearing multiple caps. They're probably short-staffed within their own companies. Maybe there's a recession happening. We just get like, life is crazy. In general, what are your tips to like put yourself in the shoe of that frazzled customer?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to realize, and I think you put it really well, they're not only frazzled, but they're also doing just fine without you. Like, everybody that you reach out to is making progress. If they weren't, they would be calling you, right? So not only are they getting lots of messages from lots of different people, but on top of that, they're also doing fine, and they're also making progress. So in order for you to break through the frazzled inbox, as Jill puts it, you have to know something that they don't know that could potentially hurt them. And just to tell a quick side story on that, this has happened, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. I'm in the mall with my wife. I didn't need anything. She was shopping. We were going to grab some dinner afterwards. Just to kill some time, I walked into a Fit to Run store. And if the sales associate said, "What brings you in today?" I would have said nothing. If she said, "Can I help you?" I would have said, "I'm good," because I'm making progress in my sneakers. If she said, "We got these new sneakers in, they got these great insoles, they got these," I would have been like, "I'm good, I got sneakers." But she didn't do any of those things. She looked down at my sneakers. She said, "Are you a runner?" I said, "Yes." She said, "What distance?" I go, "I'm actually training for my first marathon." And I'll never forget what she said. She said, "Have you ever had a running gait test?" And I said, "What the heck is that?" And then she shows me a treadmill in the store. And actually, I have video of this I could show you. And I'm running on the treadmill. She freezes the frame. She zooms into my ankles. And she said, "You notice how your ankles are overpronating when you run?" And I said, "So?" She goes, "The problem is if you run in sneakers that are not made for pronated feet, you can get injured on long distance runs. You can get shin splints and plantar fasciitis. And if you'd like, I could check your sneakers to see if they're made for pronated feet," right? And then a few minutes later, I'm buying new sneakers and insoles for like $180. The point being that she knew something that I didn't know that could hurt me. And so many sellers think, I got to give my value proposition of my new sneakers. And that's why frazzled people inboxes don't care, because they have sneakers already. So to answer your question, I got to know something that they might not know that can stop them from making progress.
Mm-hmm. Leading with that insight. And it shows credibility because you were able to share with them something that they wouldn't have access to without you. I love that. I also love that you just kicked us straight off with the story, the king of storytelling. I had absolutely no doubts that we would get a few gems. And then you ran the marathon. That was what, like last October? When was that?
I got a lot of these stories over here. I think so. Yeah, one and done on the marathon. Front.
You did it. Cross it off the list.
Right.
It's a pass for me. I'm at I live on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, and so I am at mile like 24 and a half of the Chicago Marathon. And if you ever want a front row seat on like decision making as to whether or not you're interested in running a marathon, sit out there for an hour. It'll answer that question for you real quick.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had experiences like this too, where someone sort of like shined a light or illuminated something that made you sort of think, I'm not sure. I had a similar thing happen I like to wash my car on the weekends, and I get my stuff from this place, Adams Polishes. I get this email, and I'll never forget this line in the email. It said, how do you know your wash mitt won't scratch your car? And I love my car. And it turns out that if you get dirt in your wash mitt because you use a bucket and suds, dirt can get in there, and you can actually get these scratches on your hood, which is a problem for a guy like me. I got to go take it to the body shop. It's $800. When I sell it, they run a paint thin meter over it. It's worth less money. They sell this bucket that's got a grit guard on the bottom of it, and you rub your sponge on the grit guard, and the dirt settles to the bottom of the bucket and off your sponge. And I bought it immediately. Again, another example of how to stand out in a frazzled inbox is to actually know something that your prospect doesn't know that can hurt them. And I think that's kind of Jill gets to that in her book, when she talks about status quo, which is really the biggest competitor. But I think that's kind of step one that I think so people don't overlook. They're like, what's the subject line? What's my value proposition? Can I send a GIF? Can I send a hologram? Can I send a video? Can I send a blimp? Maybe, but that's going to get someone's attention, but you won't keep it. Getting attention's easy. I can clap, I can get your attention. Keeping it, a little harder.
Right. Like, am I solving a problem, and does this person need me to help them solve it? Or is it even a problem that is important enough to them to want to take action to solve right now?
That's a great point, right? Because not all problems are worth solving right now. I mean, another story, I know. So I have literally a TV in my back bedroom. It's got a missing pixel. I rarely watch that TV. When I do, I barely notice the pixel. So I'm not going to get it fixed because I have limited resources. So do you, so does everyone. So problems alone aren't enough to inspire. If I only was running a 3K and I only ran once every 4 months, I'll roll the dice, right? So problems have to be intense and frequent for someone to sort of get wound up enough to want them to look into switching, because change is dangerous for my career. A lot of risks in changing. I know how to use what I'm using. I know how to run in these sneakers. Will I get fired if it doesn't work out? What if no one adopts it? And there's so many risks that I have to overcome to be able to get rid of inertia.
I frequently put things in my "this is future Leslie's problem" pile, where I'm like, that's interesting, or that's compelling, or I could see if future Leslie can handle it. And I'll put it on my note to circle back to in 3 months, or set a calendar reminder to look at it in 6 months. So yeah,
do you ever get to those things? Or do you not get to those things?
I do because it will like pester my brain. I'll start renting space in my head to it if I don't either do it or make the decision to not do it. But sometimes it's like, I don't need to make a decision now. I don't need to act on it now, but I'm like, it's not a never, it's just a not right now. And then in 6 months, I'll be like, is this still important to me? No, it isn't at all. Cross it off the list. Oh, this has actually gotten more important to me. It's time to take some action.
I think that's something else that you bring up that's a super relevant point, dovetails into what we're talking about. For the most part, when you're doing outbound, people aren't going to be ready to switch right now. You're sort of making them aware of something. Just like I had this mattress, and my wife said, I'm getting uncomfortable. I want a new mattress. And I knew the one she wanted was expensive. And I'm like, can we like switch sides? Can I sweep upside down? Can I sleep in another room? Like anything to like avoid buying another mattress. We tried a bunch of things for like a long time before we ended up getting another mattress. Very rarely do you sort of go from zero to buying a house immediately. It's a process. You're not buying a stick of gum here. So this idea of you're sort of planting a seed, but then you got to provide sunlight and water, which is what Leslie's doing right now, really. Like this example of what Leslie's doing is she's providing light and sunlight and watering. Someday someone's watching this and thinks, wow, that Leslie's interesting. I'm going to give her a call. So this idea, you talk about this as well, Leslie, on TikTok, this idea of also having a nurture track that you can set up, knowing that chances are they're not going to be ready right now when you buy them. And if you push too hard there, you can sort of squash the plant before you have an opportunity to grow it.
That has like literally been one of the most critical factors in my success as somebody who's been able to penetrate the C-suite in like very literally the biggest companies, the biggest logos in the world, is I run year-long nurture campaigns, just full of deposits and articles that aren't even written by my company, interesting, like anything where I can share insight, bring them value, make a deposit without any asks. And then sure as heck, what happens in Q4 when they're looking at usually like Q3 now, right? Budget's been pulled forward, but they think, oh man, this person has been sharing these amazing white papers, case studies, insights with me for months. I should reach out and see what they're doing to see if that's a fit.
Did you do that manually, or did you personalize that based on the needs of each prospect, or did you have different ones of those, or how did you do that?
Both. I'm a big fan of segmentation. So if it's somebody that I ever had an intro meeting with or ever opened an opportunity with, so I know that they are qualified, meaning like there's somebody that can pull the trigger on this decision in this budget and there's definitely a need, I will do all of that manually just so it's super personalized. Because at that point, I also know things about them like, hey, Josh, how was that marathon? Like, did the shoes make a difference? And so I really like to prioritize a very personal touch. Otherwise, I like to go with a deep segmentation process. And so maybe there'll only be 7 people in the segment because it's only CFOs of food and beverage companies that are over 6 billion in revenue that had a C-suite change in the past 6 months. And like, that's what it is, or they want whatever the trigger event is. And so that does help the nurture campaigns be slightly more automated. Like they are relevant and they are valuable, but not every piece is hyper personalized, so that I actually have the capacity to both run those and close deals. But that's worked really well for me to penetrate those big enterprise accounts.
I don't know if you're seeing this, but I don't see a lot of reps using those.
No.
And why is that, do you think?
Why? I don't know.
Everyone's kind of focused on cadences. Everyone's focused on the cadence of sort of getting the initial meeting.
Yeah.
But I don't see a lot of people giving a lot of thought to what happens when the person's literally not ready to buy. And that's not an objection. They're just, you sort of like have this saying like, you can't force flowers to grow faster because it's the end of the quarter. Sometimes the timing is off. Why do you think it is that reps don't have these nurture tracks set up, even if they're, automated by segment, as you said it? Why do you think that is?
Bad leadership, I think, is the easy answer. Like they're being pushed so hard for like those monthly, daily, weekly metrics. They're being pushed so hard against quarterly quota that they probably don't feel like they have the freedom or the band, like they, talking about now versus future problem. It's like, I'd love to make time to do that. That's a great idea. I see the value in that. But right now, if I don't get another 100K across the line this quarter, I'm going to get put on a PIP. So I think it's like competing priorities. And often that boils down to leadership having the wrong priorities or incentivizing the wrong behaviors. But yeah, it makes a difference. I would bank on it if you were an enterprise seller that it would be worth it in the long run.
I agree.
Yeah. So Jill Konrath, throughout the book, she talks about the go zone versus the D zone, and the D zone is the space where sellers get, delayed, dismissed, deleted. I think everybody that's probably in the audience right now has been put into the D zone at one point. I know I surely have. And we hear a lot about how sales processes are more complicated than ever. And, there's 8 to 12 decision makers and buyers are more educated than they've ever been. And one of the questions that I was thinking about as I read the book, so I want to get your take, is like, how how do people balance simplicity and make sure that they don't fall into the D zone while being able to articulate value? Like, how do you articulate value without drowning a prospect in information? Because I think that's easier said than done.
Yeah, I've kind of evolved into this over the course of 15 or 20 years. This wasn't always my thought on it. But what I suggest people do is adopt a surfer's mindset. Let me just kind of walk you through that a little bit, and we'll sort of ladder it back. So if you think about a surfer doesn't really judge whether a wave is going to come or not. Like, waves kind of come, they just are. And it doesn't really judge like if the wave is good or bad. It doesn't really affect if they're going to keep surfing or not. They just go out and find their set and keep surfing. Good or bad waves are all part of the same experience. Waves just are. Some waves are better, bigger than others, that you could ride them a little bit longer, better experience. Some waves are a little bit shorter. A wave crashing doesn't really get a surfer down in any way. It doesn't make them not want to surf anymore. And so when I think about these opportunities that we have as sellers, I've come to this conclusion that opportunities are very much the same. Opportunities just are. And despite what we do and processes that we follow and books that we read and things that we do and mutual action and close plans that we make and all these things, some waves are going to close and some waves are not going to close. And it's okay if you just look at it that way, that it's all part of the same experience. And really, honestly, it doesn't really matter, and it's out of your control. When a prospect buys or if they buy, you don't control it. You can certainly shine a light on things and motivate things, but at the end of the day, you don't control it. And when you tend to focus on things you don't control all the time, it's a recipe for being anxious and upset all the time. So I've kind of approached this as the opportunity just is. I brought it to their attention. I floated it up there, and I'm just going to keep riding some waves. I'm going to find the right beach with the waves that I think are going to be the best. I'm going to paddle out there. I'm going to wait patiently for a wave, meaning a conversation. And then I'm going to have that conversation without being attached to any kind of outcome or expectations. And some of these waves that I ride will be open to having a conversation with me and continuing the conversation. But I'm not going to chase a wave. I'm not going to judge a wave. I'm not going to put a wave on a time frame. And what I have found in the last, 5 to 7 years of doing this is I've realized that some of these waves close and some of them don't. And it doesn't matter if I put more attention on them or concentrate on them harder. It's not going to make them do anything. I just have a surfer's mindset of equanimity. I just sort of accept the waves for how they are without trying to force things or judge things.
I love that. And I'm immediately, and I think you'll appreciate this, filing that away for November when I go to Costa Rica and surf for the first time in my entire life, because then I'll be able to say, I surfed for the first time today, and it reminded me of a story that Josh Braun told me last month.
I mean, look, you and I just went through this a month or so ago, right? Like you're home, not doing anything. I call you and say, hey, Leslie, I have this opportunity that I think would be right up your alley, right? You weren't expecting it. It was just a wave that came. These things happen all the time to you. I'm sure I'm not the only one floating things out. Now, that wave happened to have turned into money for you. Some of those do, some of those don't. But if you just kind of lean back and realize that it's all just experiences and these are just things that are happening and waves, it sort of calms the mind down tremendously. It all works out okay. Even if you get put on a PIP. I've been put on PIPs. I have been let go from jobs, and it has always been okay. When you're going through it, you think it's the end of the world, but that's a story you're telling yourself. Oh my God. I mean, I just had this conversation today with a good friend of mine. Hey, I got to bail on this job. It'll be the second bail I've had in 6 months. And people are going to look at me in a negative way. I go, are they? Well, says who? Says your thoughts. Right. But it's just a story you're telling yourself. And that story sometimes can really make us a little mishigas, to use a Jewish word, Leslie. You can Google that later if you want.
I will. I will. No, like immediately I was thinking, I was thinking that like that same week that you referred me to the client that's now a client, you floated another deal past me. And because I didn't feel compelled to like try to ride every wave,
yes,
I was able to say, you know what, that one's not that's not the right one for me to serve.
Right.
But then I was also thinking about like, oh my God, it's already been like almost 2 years ago when I was job searching before I decided to do sales team builder full time. And it was like 3 months into my job search and I was frustrated and like, nobody's ever going to hire, blah, blah, blah. And you were like, wait, I'm sorry, how many weeks have you even been talking to people? And I was like 10. You were like, dial it back. Like you go like, and this is one of your like talk tracks that I absolutely love the best. Actually, you talk a lot about detaching from the outcome. And while it is extremely hard to do, particularly I think in a job search situation, like detaching from the outcome in a sales situation helps you be the best possible seller, because it's not about I have to get this money across the line. It's how can I create the best experience for the buyer? Like frictionless is the new buzzword. Like how can I make this valuable and frictionless for the buyer and not make it about me?
Yeah, I mean, let's even back this up to life, right? So most people are unaware of the thoughts that they're telling themselves. Like if we had an amplifier on our thoughts and people could hear what we're thinking, they'd think we're crazy, because there's always these things coming in and going. And because brains are negatively biased, we go into this downward spiral. And this happened to me, and I practice mindfulness quite a bit. And this happened to me 3 weeks ago. I'm doing a deal with this client. It was a 4-part training series, and I did part number 1, and I was a little Josh 1.0 with one of the SDRs, meaning I was a little abrasive. And as after I said what I said, I'm like, that might have been not good. I wasn't able to stop myself, but I realized it afterwards, which was a lot of progress for me. And then afterwards, I reached out to my contact and I said, hey, let's schedule the second part. And I didn't hear back for 3 days. So I started thinking to myself, wait a second, maybe I blew this one. Maybe I upset this person. She complained to the manager. Maybe they want to cancel. Maybe they want their money back. I'm going to hear from procurement any day. And you start to go into this downward spiral. But fortunately, I had been practicing mindfulness and I was able to, instead of going down the spiral, which is what most people do, they're not even aware of it. They live their whole life that way. I was able to stop myself after 6 or 7 hours, I think, and think, gee, there I go again. Who's making me think that? What, is that a story or a fact? The fact is she hasn't gotten back to me. The story is they want their money back. And usually stories are just not true. They're just made up things. And we go into these spirals. A couple of days later, she reached out. I was on vacation. No worries. Let's schedule it. Everything's great, right? So same thing with you. It's like the first step is even being aware that you're having the thoughts. Shifting from being unaware to being aware. This is a mindfulness at its core. And just observing how you're feeling can just turn the volume down tremendously, because you realize the waves just keep coming and going all the time.
It's so true. We could go, well, maybe you'll have to come back next year, because I on the short list for books for next year is Carol Dweck's book on growth mindset. And I know that we talk a lot about just how crazy it is that we literally have the ability to rewire our brain and shift towards a bias on positivity. It's crazy. We could spend the entire time talking just about that. But I do want to spend some more time talking about snap selling, because like, honestly, I pulled so many gems out of this book. Okay. So the book is also broken into decision 1, which is just like trying to get that access to your decision maker. And then getting them to initiate change, and then obviously bringing the deal full circle. And I have to share, I sort of remade this graphic, but let me add it back to the stream. I was cackling on this page because Jill sort of call to action. It's on page 67, if anybody has the printed book. Was like so much of your reader, so much of your sales copy, like screams that this is a sales email and it's all about you and your product and your company. And it's not about the buyer. And I really giggled because some of the phrases are ones that I very much fall victim to, like partnership and partner, like make it pop. I use make it pop on my content on LinkedIn, like at least once a quarter. And when I create or rewrite email copy for a lot of my clients, it's a lot of these phrases that I remove, or like the really flowery language, which is very much Jill's call to like keep it simple, right? So I just wanted to share that because it's so funny. And I'm going to drop the link to this entire deck in the LinkedIn live comments afterwards, so folks can go back and look at this. But she goes on later in that chapter to talk about trigger events. And we already sort of dabbled in this a little bit when I was talking about, segmented campaigns. What are your favorite trigger events, or what are ways that you would recommend folks use trigger events to just reach the right people at the right time?
So there's about 14 of these that I've used throughout my career. We could certainly go through a couple of them, but it depends on what you're selling.
Use
and it
me
also
as an
depends
example.
on who you're selling to. Okay. So for instance, let's say that I was selling to Leslie, and let's imagine for a second that Leslie was on LinkedIn and she's on YouTube. But at this point, she's not on TikTok, but she has a tremendous amount of content on LinkedIn, and she has a lot of content on YouTube. And she's also selling an information product, which she actually has for sale. And she's primarily selling it organically on LinkedIn. People read Leslie's posts. They're like, wow, she's wicked smart. What is she selling? Click, I'll buy it. And I am what's called a micro creator. What I do is I take Leslie's content, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to repurpose it into small little chunks. And I'm going to put those things that she's already created on TikTok in small digestible ways. Why does that matter? Because she'll get more reach. And why does reach matter? Because the more reach you have, the more money you make. Same thing on LinkedIn. The more people that are exposed to your content, if it's smart and thought-provoking and they resonate with you, eventually they buy your stuff, right? So my hypothesis is I can take Leslie's stuff, her content, and I can repurpose it for TikTok. So my trigger event for Leslie is going to be seeing the type of content that she's releasing on LinkedIn and tying that into what I help with. So the trigger event has to tie into how you help. So if Leslie's hiring 5 people, that's an interesting thing, I guess, but it doesn't really tie into what I do as a micro creator. Mm-hmm. So not all trigger events are relevant for all people. Now, if I'm a sales trainer and a coach, and I notice that a team, like for instance, Captivate IQ is one that comes to mind. I notice they're hiring a bunch of BDRs, and I do cold outreach training, cold email training. I can relate that because I can deduce that if you're hiring a lot of BDRs, that probably means that you're focused on outbound, and that probably means that you're focused on writing emails and making cold calls. And that probably means that I might be able to help them make those a little bit better. So the trigger event has to relate to what it is that you're selling. I'm not really big on trigger events related to like something that someone wrote or a like or a comment. I see this a lot, like, hey, loved your comment on this. I sell this. It feels a little forced to me. Yeah. I also don't think you necessarily need a trigger if you have a really good first sentence that's really targeted. So for instance, for you, Leslie, I could say something like this. How are you extending your reach to salespeople that are not on LinkedIn? So that you can sell more of your information product. I'm sorry, what was it called? Your thing is called?
I actually canceled it. I took it off Teachable. I haven't told you yet.
Oh, okay. So let's imagine you had some kind of. So how are you extending?
It's called the Unleash Your Potential Playbook. I'll bring it back in another form, so we can still talk about it. Unleash your potential
so Leslie, how are you going about expanding your reach beyond LinkedIn for salespeople that are not like LinkedIn, so you can sell more guides? Working with a couple other people. So it's not a trigger event, but it is again a perspective.
I just joined like 7 or 8 pods on LinkedIn, so more people would comment on my posts. I'm kidding.
Right. But that's the idea. Is that's sort of what I call illumination question. You can actually lead with that around, but it's sort of around a trigger event because you've observed something. A trigger event is something you've observed that you can deduce a potential problem with. And that observation doesn't have to be a job, a post, it could be a problem that you are observing. Like, how are you going about doing this? Hey, Josh, how are you ensuring your car wash mitt doesn't scratch your car? You've observed that I like to wash my car on the weekends because I've ordered a bunch of product. So that's sort of a trigger event, but that question is going to get me to think, I better read the next sentence.
First of all, I actually literally hired a freelancer this year to repurpose a bunch of my webinars into short TikTok clips for that exact reason. So you didn't even know that that was already a problem that I went outbound to find a vendor to solve, and had anybody reached out to me on LinkedIn because it would have been the easiest thing and the least amount of work for me, I probably would have just said yes. So that was like an incredible example, and you didn't even know how good it was. I also think you bring up a really important distinction, and we're using the terminology trigger event. like the new terminology that's being talked about a lot is hyper personalization. And I also think your example is a great way to sort of help folks understand the difference between personalization. Hi, I saw your comment on Josh's post. Anyways, I sell. And hyper personalization, like I saw your comment on Josh's post that you're really frustrated with your current accounting software. Here's a case study that I thought that you'd be able to get some learnings from. If you ever want to hear more, let me know, right? Like, is the difference between personalization, which is more like mine right now, every email is Karen Sinnett, because that's the last person that gave me a recommendation. And then it's a pitch slap. And then it says, P.S. Great recommendation from Karen Sinnett. I'm like, please never enter my inbox again.
They're in the D zone.
They went straight into the D zone, like and the blocked zone, like deleted and blocked.
Like I'll read you an example. Like this is, I got this many months ago, right? So this is a 3-sentence email that got a response from me. And I don't know, I got it like you, probably a couple hundred emails a week from people, and my message box on LinkedIn is filled to the max. So this one broke through, right? Josh, your sales philosophy of detaching from the outcome on your podcast is something I deeply resonate with and try to emulate. Have you considered creating TikTok or Reels from your podcast to broaden your reach? And then he put in parentheses, raise his hand, which I thought was very nice, like it humanized it. Here's an example. And he actually took one of my videos and did it. Regardless, keep up the great work on the pod, right? So very casual. But the reason it got my attention isn't the trigger event. It's the insight. It's the sort of what he knew that I didn't know. Mm-hmm. That's the big piece of this that no one really talks about. Mm-hmm. The personalization stuff, or the hyper, or whatever, the supersonic hyper, which I think is coming next year. Didn't you read that? Is it going to be supersonic? Or is that a song by some group? I don't know.
Like it's a band name, maybe?
Some band. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. That's coming. Ludicrous personalization is coming in 2025.
Or that you were going to say like by Ludacris.
Right, by Ludacris. But the thing that got my attention is, again, it's this idea that I didn't know about.
Yeah.
That could sort of help me be happier. And of course, happiness is relative. Everyone wants to be happier, but what makes Leslie happy is different than what makes me happy. That's the other mistake kind of related to this is you're selling to probably 3 or 4 different types of people in the org. Those people all want to be happy, but what makes a CEO happy is different than what makes a marketing director happy. If I'm selling printers, a CFO wants to know cost per page. A marketing director wants to know vibrance of colors, speed, right? So different kind of things. So we got to sort of have different swim lanes. But that's kind of how I view trigger events.
I would even take it a step further, Josh, that like the difference between what a director of finance and a VP of finance and a CFO want is different. Because when I talk about segmentation, people will be like, oh, okay. And so then all the finance people get it. And I'm like, no. The things that the CFO talks about and what fills their day is so much different than what's happening 1 or 2 levels below them. So really doing your research to understand what specific challenges that person, just don't generalize and be human, I guess, is the crux of it.
Yeah. Why do you think that? So that's another big thing I always see is a lot of people have product training, but they don't have the problem training. Right? Like, so why do you think that is? Like, that's a big gap I always see. And so what ends up happening is you use those words that you put on the screen from Jill, right? You sort of sound what I call in fuzzy rather than in high def. Like if I'm going to call a triathlete, I can call a triathlete because I'm a triathlete. Like I can speak triathlon. I can say, if you're a triathlete, hey, Josh, a lot of the triathletes I speak to that are training for Ironman events, they're finding it really hard to strike the right balance between work, family, and training. It's like divorced by triathlon. That's a term triathletes use. That's an actual term they use. How are you juggling all that, right? That's very specific. I didn't say streamline. I didn't say optimize, but because I'm a triathlete, most reps have never done the job of the person that they're reaching out to. And so what I suggest highly for organizations is to bring someone in from the org that's doing that job and show them, don't tell them in a slide deck, but show them how they were getting the job done before they switched. I'm just going through this with Snowflake, or a client that I'm working with. They've never sold to data analysts or scientists. They've never been a data scientist, but they got data scientists there using the product. Bring a data scientist into the SDR meeting and show how they were doing exploratory analysis before Snowflake. Like take out the queries, watch them watch the spinning pinwheel of death circle while they're waiting for the queries and the jobs to run, like in real time.
Yeah.
And then spend a little bit of time on the problem. Why do you think that doesn't happen in orgs? It's so focused on product versus problem.
Well, I think product is easier to train on. Like it's pretty cut and dry, right? Like here's 10 things you need to know about the product. And then you say, what are the 10 things? And somebody just can regurgitate them back. So I think it's easy to train on. It's easy to test knowledge on. I think being a problem solver is like a whole basket of skills. You need to be able to listen. You need to be able to ask really smart questions. You need to give a shit. Like you can't really fake that or memorize it and make it a root action like product.
Yeah, I think it's a good point.
It's my take. And a reminder to folks, I'm appreciating how busy the chat is. So thank you all very much for that. And any questions that you want Josh and I to ask, don't hesitate to drop those into the chat, because as you can see, we're going pretty freestyle here. So we're happy to keep that up. Here's one question that I absolutely want to make sure to ask. So in addition to referencing blackberries, Jill also calls out Jigsaw. Do you remember Jigsaw?
You know them well, use them.
Like there was all I used. I loved him so much. I was obsessed. Then Salesforce bought him and ruined it. And in the same.
How do you really feel, Leslie? How do you really feel?
Hey, Salesforce doesn't sponsor me. No brand affiliation. I can just speak the truth. In that same section, she talks about Google Alerts. So like I said, I'll drop this deck in the chat afterwards. And I put some stuff in there, how to use Google Alerts, because I think we're talking about trigger events. We're talking about sonic hyper-personalization, the new song by Ludacris dropping this fall. But Google Alerts are a really great way to get visibility on those sorts of trigger events or indicators that maybe folks that only stay on LinkedIn aren't going to see. So I'll put that in here. But here's my question. She also talks about blogs. So mind you, this is 2010. And she's like, man, if you want to set yourself apart, write a blog. And then I think the evolution, because it was so true at the time. And you see, like, that's how Keenan from Gap Selling got his start, was writing a blog. And then he launched to fame after that. And I think the evolution after blog was podcast. Like you were really early on the podcast train. Now I think it's like pretty saturated. You have to have a very high quality podcast for it to get airtime. What's next? Like it's the blog to the podcast to what is the next thing out there?
Yeah, so I may have a little bit of a contrary view on this. I never, ever think about what has been or what will be. I always think about what is and what I can do now.
Nihilist?
Yeah, no, I'm not a denialist, because I think that the only thing that exists is what's now. Like really, if you think about it, your experience is only what's happening right now. You don't even know if you're going to be around in 5 or 10 years. What you have is right now, right? So you can certainly spend some time thinking about the future. But if you wanted to do something right now, if I was an SDR, this is what I would do in that vein. And this is what I did do when I was an AE and an SDR. And this is something you could relatively easily execute. You can work with your marketing department, and you can figure out the 5 to 10 questions that your prospects or customers typically ask related to what you're selling or what they should be asking. And you can figure out your company's take on that. And you can record or write short little Q&As for each one of those. For each one of those, let's say there's 5 or 7 or 10. And you can then take those, and you can certainly put them, as Leslie put it earlier, in your nurture track. You can certainly take those and you can turn them into an ebook. You can certainly take those interviews and you can actually, or those videos, and put them on LinkedIn. And then you can certainly reach out to people that are prospects and say, hey, I got this show where I answer these questions and talk to people that are marketing directors about this thing. And I've got a couple questions for you. Would love your take on it. Would you want to be on my show? And you can then reach out to them, and you can ask those questions, and you can interview them, and you can put those videos on LinkedIn, like right now, today. Charlotte Johnson over at Sales Loft is a great example of this. Before she got that job, and as soon as she got that job, I should say, she reached out to, she's never sold to VPs of sales before, didn't know anything about selling. She reached out to them and said, hey, I got this new gig, and I want to learn a little bit more about what you guys are doing over there, and would you help me out? And she said it more eloquently than I did. And she had about a 70%, sure, I'll give you my insights, because people love to share their opinion. It feels good on your ego.
They love to help.
Wow, you want to hear from me? I'm Mrs. VP of sales or whatever. And then she learned a bunch, and a lot of those turned into opportunities, but she took that content that she learned and she turned it into posts, and she turned it into some videos. She wasn't really thinking about the future of what could be, who knows. She was actually doing the now and the sort of current experience. So those are just some thoughts on like how to leverage, content creation to,
you're kind of weaving a couple things together. It's like an evolution of a podcast, more like fireside chat, but more focused on like the intimate connection, getting a deep, like almost social listening a little bit. So you're getting that like deep understanding, and then also having this incredible content that you can repurpose to share that knowledge and insight. Yeah. Like weaving a couple. I like that. Yeah. I like that. It also will probably come as no surprise that one of my top performing subject lines ever, regardless of the ICP I'm selling to, is feedback and guidance. Feedback & guidance. Crazy open rates, crazy reply rates, because people want to help.
One of my favorite lines ever in a cold call that I've been using since I was in my 30s was something to the effect of this: Leslie, as someone with a successful 12-year career in sales, what's your take on where prospecting is going?
Ooh, what's your take?
What's your take? What's your take? What's your opinion? What's your opinion on X? Which
I would immediately drop my guard, because I would be like, oh, this guy's not trying to sell me something. He just thinks that I'm smart and he wants to learn from me.
One of the things I teach when we do cold calling is, let's not assume that your prospect has no idea what you're selling. Let's not assume prospects have no idea that they could automate their commission payouts for just a second. Let's assume they know about it. Rather than you pitching it, what if you say this during the talk track? This was working really well for like a Captivate IQ. So, hey, John, as someone with a long and successful 12-year career in RevOps, what's your opinion on automating commission payouts? And then what you're going to hear is them telling you all the reasons why it won't work for them, because chances are they've tried it. They kind of know about it. And then you could say, they might say, well, it's too complex. And then you might say, in what way? And they may open up, and then you may be able to create an opening from that or not. But to then enlighten them on commission payouts for someone that's been in RevOps for 8 years, thinking that they have no idea what it is very assumptive. So
we should not treat our prospects like they are stupid.
I always assume everyone knows what I'm selling and has a take on it and has tried it and looked into it and has decided not to do it for some reason. I want to know what that is. So that's it kind of ties into this idea of getting someone's take or opinion and letting them shine, because egos love to give opinions and they love to correct you if you're wrong, but they don't like it when you give your opinion. This is not even just sales. This is kind of life stuff.
It's the classic, like, people love to buy but hate to be sold to.
Yeah,
absolutely. You're absolutely right. I definitely like to lead with the assumption that, and this is the first time in my life, these past couple months as a solopreneur, that I have ever sold to salespeople. I've spent my entire career selling mostly to C-level executives, like actual legitimate experts in spaces where I've maybe worked for months or years. And like, one of the things that I did very wrong early in my career was I tried to sound too smart.
In what way? What do you mean? What, meaning you tried to say things that you didn't know?
Yeah. I mean, some of it was using like really like robust, ridiculous language, things I would never say in real life, because I thought that would make me sound more legitimate to these people. Certainly part of it was like trying to educate them on their own problems, but not from like a perspective of telling, versus like, hey, other people have shared X. Can you tell me what your experience with, like, not from a, hey, this is what I'm hearing from your peers. Can you help me understand what that means for you? More like well, what I think is, and it did not work. No surprise, it did not work. But you still see so many people out there sending these emails that are not how they would speak in real life and coming off like honestly kind of condescending or presumptuous in a not good way.
You're bringing up a great point. That's one of my golden rules of selling is people don't like being told they're wrong. So for instance, let's imagine I have a broken window in my garage and you fix windows and you came to me and said, Josh, the window in your garage is broken. Why haven't you gotten it fixed?
Because I like that's
gonna put me on the defensive because you're basically subconsciously saying you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Versus, hey Josh, saw that your window was broken in your garage. Is that something you're looking to get fixed anytime soon, or are you good for how it is right now?
Or is that the door for your pet raccoon to come in and out?
Right. But sort of, again, it kind of gets back to you're shining a light on a problem and you're letting the prospect come to their own conclusion rather than you giving them your conclusion.
That's why questions work so well, because you are allowing the prospect to sell themselves. You don't even have to do the work. They just slowly get to the outcome that you're hoping. I mean, if it all makes sense, if it's a good fit, by being like, oh, you're right. That is actually really causing me stress. Oh, now that I think about it, it would be amazing to have.
Yeah. So like in the example, Leslie, know you're super active on LinkedIn. You got a bunch of videos. Have you thought about repurposing that content on TikTok so that you can get more reach and ultimately sell more X's? Like, have you considered that? What's your take on doing that versus you're doing it wrong, right? So like it's subtle. It's not why haven't you got your window fixed? Is this something you're looking to get fixed? It's not accusatory. It's sort of letting the prospect come to their own conclusion. Not assuming they want to get it fixed. Yeah.
I want to stay on questions for a bit. First, I'm going to share my bold prediction because I want it recorded. I want it here to live.
Let's do it. Is it ludicrous personalization? Is that what it is?
It's so close. How did you know?
I don't know.
I think it's going to be micro communities, like the stuff that you're already seeing. So like Reveting with Whiskey Wednesdays would be an example.
What is that? I'm not familiar with this term.
Well, I'm going to be live tomorrow, so you can come and check it out. Or like Scott Leese's Thursday, like Scott and Amy's Thursday night sales is.
Well, you're saying this is happening now, not in the future. This is my point, Leslie. See, everything's happening now. This is not the future.
But that's still like very early, right? Like two people are really doing it right. Well, I would say like Morgan and Nick are doing like B2B Power Hour, but like those micro communities where somebody shows up every single week in their case for their community. Kind of like what we're doing here, but I do it every 4 to 6 weeks at my leisure, and I only talk about the books I want to talk about, so a little bit different.
It's your show, Leslie. It's your show.
It's my life. This is what we're doing.
It's your show.
I think those micro communities are going to be, and I know a couple people like will run them in Circle or run them on Slack channels. I think that's going to be the new thing that like right now only a few people are doing it. And they're going to see it grow and grow and grow in popularity until that becomes saturated. So that's my goal.
So it's once a week they get on and they talk about some like what we're doing, but they do it on a frequent basis.
Yeah. So like the one I'm on tomorrow is with Chris Cunningham and Kevin Dorsey. And then there's two hosts, Eddie and Jesse. And so we have like 4 topics that we're just going to like answer questions and rap about. And like Thursday night sales, I've actually never attended Thursday night sales, but from my understanding, it's to help people get jobs.
Oh.
So like if you're hiring or you're looking for a new job, you join and people just like talk about positions or advice or I don't know, whatever the case may be. And I think those types of micro communities, like the Reveting one is very B2B marketing focused. TNS is very job focused. And then they become a community for your community.
So meta.
I think that's going to be the thing, right? Because like that's kind of what blogs did, and then that's what podcasts did. I think micro communities. Write it down. What's the date?
Write it down. October what 4th. Leslie said right now. You heard it first.
October 1st. Okay, we're almost out of time.
I'm going to go with ludicrous personalization. I'm going to stick with that one.
Okay, it's in the books. It's in the book. Maybe this will be another thing. Like when I was talking shit about Clubhouse. And everybody was like, you're so wrong. It's going to be amazing. And I am so passive aggressive, or I'm so petty maybe, that I added it to my calendar a year from when I said that it was not going to make it. And then a year later, I went back and like emailed the people that were like, you're wrong. And was like, hey, Jenny.
You should have sent me an email, because I was one of those people. I thought it was going to be, you should have emailed, because I was one of those people like, oh, this is the big thing. And I think I may have told you that. You didn't send me an email, but maybe you're just
out of kindness. I'm like, no, I still want to be friends with you. Just a gif of me like dropping the mic. Okay, so we are almost at time here. My last sort of question, because Jill, all of chapter 19 is about questions. And I think the title of it is like, questions are the answer, which I love, and I completely agree. And I was going to say one of my favorite pieces of advice, because she has a question in there that, let me pull it up. She suggests using the question, you mentioned a number of challenges. What are your top priorities? And I, a couple of years ago, had the privilege of working with this like incredible sales coach. And he really focused on like time boxing and clarity, which is something that so wholly made sense to me and I embrace. So instead of saying, you mentioned a lot of challenges, what are your priorities? Like, you mentioned a lot of challenges. If you had to rank them, what would be at the top of that list? Or you mentioned a lot of challenges. If you had to point out the one that was most important to get right in the next 6 months, which would that be? Because then you are so much better able to identify where you can help today versus like being focused on that evergreen problem, like talent, which like that's always gonna, you know what I mean? That doesn't give them a reason to act today instead of later. Before we wrap up here, maybe what's your like last golden nugget of advice on questions are the answer?
I'll just give you like an example.
Yeah.
Right. So an example of a really good one that I got. This is from Kendra Warlaw, that cold called me, I want to say a couple years ago. She was working for a company called Gravy Solutions at the time. And I'll just go through the talk track because it's very ingrained in my head. And it was a great question, to your point. So I'm in a car with my wife, and my phone rings on Bluetooth. I pick it up on my car phone. And she goes, hey, Josh, this is Kendra with Gravy. I'm calling you from the drive-through at Starbucks. Now, that immediately got my attention, right? I'm like, what are you getting? She's like, a caramel macchiato. She goes, what do you like to drink? I go, oh, I don't drink Starbucks. I go, Kendra, why are you calling? And she goes, oh, sometimes I have so much fun talking about Starbucks that I forgot. Oh yeah, right. So that's another really great. So to me, humor is one of the best ways to pull it off. Like she did. So then she says this. Like, this is kind of the question that she asked, which I thought was really, a really insightful question. She goes, hey, I was taking a spin through your shop on your site at the guide and at your cold calling course and at your tongue-tied flashcards. And I was wondering how you're dealing with people that aren't able to pay because their credit card failed. Oof. And I said, well, I'm using Stripe. And she goes, oh, it sounds like you're logging into Stripe each day and figuring out who hasn't paid, who got declined. And I'm like, not really. She goes, well, how are you doing that then? Like, I don't even know how you could do that in Stripe. She goes, I'll tell you what, I'll send you instructions on how to log into Stripe, and you can check this specific area. And if you're seeing a lot of failed payments, you can give me a call. Oof. She goes, sound good enough? I go, sure. So she then 2 minutes later, she sends me this document with like step-by-step instructions. I log into Stripe. Turns out I didn't have the problem, but I was so taken back by it that we ended up staying in touch. And if I ever did have that problem, or I know any, and I've referred a ton of people to Gravy from that, but it was all started with a question. Another just a quick example for a company called Warmbox. Hey, Leslie, we're seeing that about 51% of emails that SDRs send through tools like Outreach and SalesLoft are ending up in spam folders. Whew. How are you avoiding spam folders today when your SDRs send cold emails?
Yeah, calling Jesse.
That's going to sort of jolt. That's going to jolt. Now, Warmbox gets more email delivery. Those questions are going to make someone scratch their head and think, well, I'm not sure. That's what you're kind of looking for, right?
Like, oh, dang, I didn't even realize.
Right.
Oh my God. I love that example with Kendra, humor, pattern interrupt, deposit, light call to out. I love everything about that. Yeah. we are at time. Technically, we're 60 seconds over. Hopefully, folks don't mind. I feel like this has just been a wealth of information. I love it so much. I love this entire book. I absolutely adored this conversation. Thank you so much for your invaluable advice. See what I did there? Yeah. And I wanted to end on this quote on this slide, because the very last 2 or 3 paragraphs of the book were actually a couple of my favorite. And the header for this last section was "Success is a decision." And Jill brings it home with the call to action to try new things, to realize that you will absolutely fail along the way, and to not give up, and to not settle for the status quo. And then she leaves us with this poem that I'm now sharing with you. But truer words, huh? Isn't that just the profession of sales?
It's a great quote. What are you reading now, Leslie?
I'm reading a fantasy book. Actually, I'm reading a fantasy trilogy. Something from Brandon Sanderson, Stormlight Archives. I just started it. If there's any mega nerds on the phone or on the call with me. And then I'm reading Todd Capone's The Transparent Sales Leader. Todd is incredible. Both of his books are very good. If anybody is looking for something to read, what are you reading?
I'm reading Waking Up by Sam Harris. It's a book on mindfulness. So I've been deep into that. But I'm 30 years older than you, Leslie. You'll see when you get to be my age.
30 years older than me.
When you get to be an old Jewish man like me, you'll start reading mindfulness books too. You got time. Give yourself time. Leslie, it's always great to be with you. I really appreciate that you invited me. I forgot how charming you were. You and I used to do a podcast together way back.
We did. They were my first podcast.
I really enjoy your company, and always enjoy your take on things.
Same. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who joined. We really appreciate your time and attention. Josh, we'll do this again soon.
Would love to. Thanks for inviting me.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.